The intrigue of the year is complete. Su-35 and Mi-28NM will definitely strengthen Iran's air force in the near future. How this will change the military balance of power in the Middle East, we will tell you right after we compare Russian shells against American ones. After a demonstration of a US munitions factory, some had many questions. I was particularly amused by the members of the Witnesses to a Beautiful America sect, who are hell-bent on the level of American technology. They immediately started shouting that, say, in Russia it's the same shit, the same warline, and everything has fallen apart too. It's the same on Russia, only hirsute. Aha. Well, let's take a look at what it's like in Russia and how much of a wreck we have. Thanks to the fact that Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu checked the fulfillment of the state defense order in the Nizhny Novgorod region, we had an opportunity to see Russian shell factories. The video shows the production process of FAP 500 and FAP 1500 aerial bombs, as well as artillery shells and their charges at the plant. It's clear that everything is clean, with fresh shops and new lines. And how else would Russia be able to increase the production of some types of ammunition by 50 times? To do this simply by switching to 24-hour operation on the old lines will not do it. Only on new ones. But it's the other thing that sticks with me the most. Let me remind you of a shot of an American plant from our past material. Take a closer look at the American worker. He's got an old tattered jumpsuit. It was a parade shot for a propaganda magazine. I mean, the squalor in the US is such that the workers didn't even change into new overalls for parade filming. As I understand it, the factory just doesn't have new overalls. They didn't. The workers themselves patch up old overalls and live like that. Now take a look at the video from the Russian factory. Now, for a change, the Tula plant, Splav. The American workers of the military-industrial complex never dreamed of such overalls. I never dreamed of equipment like this. And to finish off the Americans, here's the official video from plastics plant JSC. As you can see, the factory has existed since pre-war times, but since then everything there has been completely rebuilt. The equipment is new and the products are a whole different level. People in white coats are working with the shells. A lot of people have asked about raw steel shrapnel shells. I mean, how can it be? Are Americans completely retarded? No, guys, they're not shit, they just don't care about the outcome. The main thing for them is profit, and how it works there, don't give a damn and forget it. The shell flew away, exploded, what more do you want? This is what a piece of shrapnel from an American 155mm fragmentation projectile looks like. See, the hull just ripped into several large pieces. Because raw steel, it's malleable, it doesn't shatter. By the way, it's the same situation in Country 404 with the 152mm shells they are trying to make in their factories. The people of Country 404 don't even know how to hot mold, they just sharpen shells from a solid billet. Naturally, the same raw steel, cheap low-carbon steel is used. As a result, a range comparison revealed that the ancient Soviet UF-29 munition, when detonated, produced 1,700 to 2,000 fragments, while the new projectile from Country 404 produced only 100. Guess how much less likely it is to hit the enemy with such a projectile? What, you're having trouble? It's not hard to do the math. 2,000 divided by 100, we get 20. Yes, a projectile from Country 404 is 17 to 20 times less effective. You'd have to fire 20 times as many of them to achieve the same killing effect as the old UV-29. This is, of course, only for shrapnel action. For high explosive it's not so bad. People ask, but if the American plant is ancient, the Second World War, then the manufacturing process of hot-forming shells is also, apparently, ancient. But then, 70 years ago, Americans weren't morons. They were then a highly industrialized nation, one of the most advanced. How could they have gotten so screwed up? And they didn't screw up. This process, hot molding from raw steel, was developed for making non-shrapnel projectiles, for high-explosive, concrete-piercing and armor-piercing projectiles. That's where shrapnel isn't needed, and that's where this technology shows great results. The shells are made quickly, cheap, their characteristics have good repeatability, the consumption of expensive cutting tools is low, and there are few chips. For those interested, here is the design of Russian 152mm caliber high-explosive shells for naval guns of high ballistics of the Lokhmatov pattern of 1928. This projectile carries relatively little explosive and is detonated by a bottom fuse after it has penetrated the target. There you no longer need a lot of small fragments, the main task of such a projectile is to break through the obstacle. The crud in this case works quite acceptably. The projectile is certainly deformed before detonation, but not destroyed, allowing the explosive to develop high pressure and then bursting to eject a shock wave inside the target. However, time passed, and field artillery came to use universal fragmentation projectiles, abbreviated OFS, whose action is switched by readjusting the fuse before firing. If the projectile explodes the first time it touches an obstacle, it functions as a fragmentation projectile, and if the explosion is delayed long enough to penetrate the target, it is like a high explosive projectile. Of course, a universal one performs worse than a specialized one, but using a universal shell simplifies logistics. Or, the enemy attacked, and the battery has only landmines, and then what to do? It's better this way. Now, the Americans have always had a problem with fragmentation shells. The Americans tried to use shrapnel instead. But with the high explosive ones to crack defenses, they were doing well. So it turned out that when after the war the surplus shell factories were sawed for scrap metal, only the lines that made high explosive shells by hot molding from raw steel were preserved. That's what the Americans have made modern OFSs for, as it were, because there is no other technology. You will say, you have to harden the shell casing and make notches on it to make it easier to separate into fragments. If only it were that simple. The energy of modern guns is high. To throw the shells 40 kilometers, they are accelerated in the barrel with huge overloads. A fragile shell casing, especially one weakened by notches, will simply crack and burst right in the barrel channel when fired, and this is what happens. Do Americans need this? Don't. And the scrambler will fly out of the barrel even if it is slightly deformed. And somewhere in there, it's going to explode. The order is fulfilled, the money is spent, what else do you want? So that's how it is with them. And that's how they live their lives. He sounds like a fat lion, but he's a dick. But innovation and efficient owners. In Russia, the case is different. If it turns out at the firing range that the OFS produces few fragments, there will be an uproar. The managers who allowed such a defect will go to develop remote areas with a shitty climate, and the military acceptance officers will be tried by a tribunal. That's why our shells and bombs explode the way they are supposed to according to Gost. Now for the intrigue of the year. Su-35 and Mi-28NF will definitely strengthen Iran's air force in the near future. One of the interesting achievements of the Su-35 was the fact that it is personally listed in the CAACA sanctions law and only truly sovereign countries can afford to buy it. The first buyer was China, now Iran has been added. I have not heard any suggestions in the last 6 months regarding the deal between Russia and Iran on the first batch of Russian Su-35 SE fighters. And the fact that Iran rejected them because of their ineffectiveness, which is ridiculous, because the Su-35S is currently the most effective fighter of the new millennium. And the fact that the Russian leadership is forbidden to sell it out of paradise. And even that Iran doesn't actually have any money at all. Damn things were made up, and most importantly written, not only by bloggers, but also by all sorts of odious flying magazines. As always, these rumors were formed against the backdrop of the information vacuum, or if you like, the fog of war that has arisen around the deal. Back in March this year, it was spoken of as a fait accompli. And in May, according to Israeli publications citing their Omani military intelligence, the first vehicles were to settle into their new home at the rebuilt airbase Cobb 44, or Eagle 44. But nothing of the sort was happening, and it was time to guess at the coffee grounds. In September, Forbes wrote, in no uncertain terms, that Iran itself had backed out of the deal because of hopes of receiving U.S. frozen cash in Qatari banks. By the way, the United States, gracefully ditched the Iranians as usual, saying that they felt with their spinal cord that Iran was involved in the events in Ghazi. No one has proven it, but what does the hegemon care? Although these events did not really have any impact on the agreements between Moscow and Tehran in May 2022, which held the first talks on the start of full-scale military cooperation. By the way, the Su-35 has several dozen air battles won. It is the only combat aircraft of the 21st century flown by true aces. But back to Iran. Until today, the most advanced Iryov fighter, translated by the Air Force of the Islamic Republic of Iran, was the Oral 44-based MiG-29A-12 bought in the last year of the Soviet Union. The rock bunkers were defended by ancient Vietnam War Phantoms that the Iranian military used as fighter bombers. It has to be said that Iran has kept its old machines in exemplary order as well, having managed to make a number of rather competitive aviation and precision weapons for them. But the fact remained. Events in Eastern Europe have perfectly demonstrated that early fourth-generation aircraft without modernization are absolutely not ideally capable against more modern fighters of the 4++ generation. The MiG-29s and Su-27s couldn't win a single air battle against the newer Suskas, except in cool sci-fi stories about various ridiculous ghosts. And that's an ironclad fact. Iran's main enemies are armed with equally advanced aircraft, including the stealthy F-35, LIGHTNING-2. And despite the fact that this machine causes a lot of controversy, but a set of good weapons, powerful radar and involvement in the net-centric system of combat makes it a dangerous opponent, and for the older MiGs and even more so Phantoms simply fatal. By the way, this is how the site of the future Su-35 parking lot looks like, the base of AHAP-44. It will be hidden from potential impacts deep within the rock face. The Iranians really wanted to buy the 35th. They, for they're not the smallest country with complex terrain, fit virtually perfectly. Long range. The ability to carry a wide range of weapons including air-to-surface missiles, good payloads and powerful radars made the Suska a coveted prize for the Iriof. And when under US pressure Egypt refused to give up its batch of already manufactured export Su-35s, Iran immediately expressed its readiness to take it all. But, apparently, some of our people still had some illusions about possible reconciliation with the West. Then they finally dissipated. The first geraniums clearly showed that cooperation has reached a new level, and in December 22, Iran for the first time at the official level announced the start of the implementation of the deal on Su-35 and combat multirole helicopters. There was also talk of the Iranian side's keen interest in the Su-34 Ducklings. In total, Tehran was ready to shell out money for 150 airplanes of various purposes, of which more than 100 were fighters and fighter bombers only. By any standards, this is an unusually fat contract. That desire hasn't gone anywhere even now. Whenever Iranian officials make a statement about the purchase of the Su-35, they accompany it with the caveat that it is only an initial batch. Everyone understands how much the Su-35 will change the balance of forces in this theater. Any attempt to bomb Iran's military facilities, already complicated by the logistics of geography and the presence of decent air defenses in general, would border on suicide. By the way, another important deal was the contract for Mi-28 NME attack helicopters. Many might say that we need cars like this for ourselves. But, first of all, the defense complex must at least somehow cover the costs of domestic needs. And secondly, the money from such contracts allows us to expand production and produce enough cars. And in the summer not only the Western media, but also some domestic military bloggers suddenly started some incomprehensible information fuss around this contract and even began to deliberately berate the Iranians, as usual basing their conclusions on speculative assumptions and banal gossip. Although the Yak-130 trainer aircraft arriving in Iran made its future intentions clear. And on November 28, 2023, all speculation surrounding this topic finally came to an end. Following a statement by Iran's Deputy Defense Minister General Syed Mehdi Farhi. He confirmed that all formalities of the deal have been finalized and the Iranian Air Force will soon receive 2 modern Russian designs at once. Su-35 SE fighter jets for the Air Force and Mi-28 NME attack helicopters for the IRGC. Many were surprised that the Iranians chose a Night Hunter rather than the more efficient and battle-tested Ka-52 Alligator. But they wanted the Mi-28 specifically because they knew the helicopter well from its work during the 2014 to 2017 war against outlawed ISIS in northern Iraq. There the Hunter not only demonstrated combat power, but was not once shot down, although such attempts were constantly occurring. So now two-way and mutually beneficial traffic on the Caspian Bridge will begin, and it can only be welcomed.